Hi there, it's Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder here with this week's episode of Playing on a Budget. You heard me right. For all you old timers that might remember this video series, I used to do a video series for Cool Stuff Inc. / Gathering Magic called Playing on a Budget. Also did some videos on this channel, and it's been many years since I've done one, so I thought that I'd get my New Year's resolution out of the way early this year and bring back some of the old school videos that brought people to this channel in the first place. So, Playing on a Budget will be coming back, as well as the Tuesday Brews Day, and we're going to do a Commander deck tech. So those are my three goals, to try to pump out 3 different video series per week, and hopefully we can stay on track with that. So Playing on a Budget, we used to have a $100 budget when I did it for Gathering Magic, but I think with this video series, it's just going to depend on whether it be Modern or Pioneer or Pauper, what that budget will be, but it is going to be in a budget range. So this particular deck for this week is going to be $35, and I can show you some ways you can actually shave off even more, but most of the cards in this list are going to be under that dollar mark. So the Scrapwork Mutt was a card that was printed out of Brothers War. It has the Unearth mechanic, which has been a mechanic that I've been obsessed with. I've really thought that this is an underrated mechanic. It has often the 2-for-1 feel to it. The haste ability from Unearth makes it very aggressive, and it just hasn't really had a home in Pioneer, hasn't really had anything printed in Pioneer, but there is the card, the Scrapwork Mutt, that not only enables other Unearth cards, but it also enables Madness. And Madness is another card that I've been absolutely, or another mechanic that I've been absolutely obsessed with, as especially since it was brought back in Shadows of Innistrad. And Pioneer has flirted with it. I've seen Fire Tempers be played in various decks. I know that Ledger Shredder decks have been playing some Fire Tempers every now and again. But Madness is another mechanic that I think is just so underrated, because not only does it reduce the cost of casting the spell, it also basically allows you to cast it for free, because you're going to be using the discard as a cost. So whether it be drawing a card off the discard, like what Scrapwork Mutt says, or a card like Lightning Axe that allows you to discard a card as an additional cost to reduce its cost, it's going to be able to mitigate that cost to be able to be cast for its Madness. So I'm really liking both these mechanics, Unearth and Madness. I think they work very well together, and Scrapwork Mutt seems to be the perfect card to really be the glue to those. And so I'm really excited to try to brew around this particular card. So Scrapwork Mutt, before we get into the deck tech, is a 2-mana 2/1 artifact creature with Unearth of 1 and a red, which when it enters the battlefield, you discard a card and then you can draw a card. So I really like this card, as it enables a easy Madness for just 2 colorless mana. And then the Unearth is very viable too, a 2/1 that then has haste, can get in for that last bit of damage, so it's perfect in that sort of aggressive Fire Temper, Alms of the Vein type shell. So let's talk about that first off, is the 2 Madness cards that I think go perfectly in this deck. And the first one being Fire Temper, which is a 3-mana lightning bolt, 1 red and a red if you cast it without its Madness, but its Madness reduces it to a lightning bolt, and it does 3 damage to target creature or player. So again, it's oftentimes it's better than a lightning bolt if you can actually get that Madness trigger to give you some value, whether it be off like a blood token or like the Scrapbook Mutt. Then the cost of discarding a card ends up being a free card in the form of a Madness card. And what's better than a lightning bolt, one of the best cards ever printed? The next up is Alms of the Vein. There are a lot of aggressive strategies in the Pioneer format, and it also is quite a bit of damage for 1 mana. So again, it's going to be a 3 mana if you have to hard cast it. Target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life, but the Madness allows you to do it for 1 black. Very aggressive. Oftentimes, again, off a blood token, you're going to be drawing a replacement card for this, so this ends up basically being a free card. So those are the 2 Madness cards that we really want to make it work. So another way that we are going to stay aggressive is we're going to go back to Shadows of Innistrad and the latest sets with the Crimson Vow, and we're going to pick some very aggressive vampires. So the first one being from Shadows of Innistrad is the Falkenrath Gorger. Falkenrath Gorger is a 2/1 for 1 mana, which is exactly what this deck wants to be doing. It wants to be establishing a threat on turn number 1, and then each vampire that's not on the battlefield, that's in your deck or in your hand, has Madness. So the Falkenrath Gorgers not only work off themselves, but all of the other vampires that we're going to be running this deck are going to have Madness. And so the first one being Voldaren Epicure is a 1 mana for a 1/1 that leaves back a blood token. So future, like if you get a Falkenrath Gorger and then an Epicure out or some other blood token, you can actually Madness your own Epicure in for free and then leave back another blood token. And so this is just a free resource. So this is just a deck that wants a lot of staying power. It wants something that is going to replace every one of its card effects. And so it's like a burn-based strategy that has this built in, we're going to be drawing cards as well. So the Epicure is just a very aggressive card, a 1 mana for 1, does the damage when it comes into play, leaves back a blood token to enable your madness. It's everything we want in this deck. And then we have the Bloodtithe Harvester, which is one of the best creature cards ever printed. It's seeing play all over Standard and Pioneer right now, which is a 3/2 for 2 mana, a black and a red, which enters the battlefield with a blood token, the same as the Epicure does, but you can sacrifice the Bloodtithe Harvester to give a creature negative to X, where X is twice the amount of blood tokens on the battlefield. So rounding off to make one more vampire and also give us 10/1 drops, because I think this deck wants to come out aggressive with some sort of threat, whether it even just be a 1/1 or a 2/1, is going to be the Insolent Neonate. This is a creature with Menace, a 1/1 for 1 red, which allows you to discard a card, sacrifice the Neonate, and draw a card. So it's a way to enable the madness and get in there for that quick menace damage that often can get in there for 1, 2, 3 points of damage before it is taken care of, and if you just need to sacrifice it in response to some sort of removal and get some sort of value later on to just like pitch a land or a madness card. It's a very, very good card at that point. So those are going to be our vampire package, and we also do have what I call the honorary enabler as well, which is the Vampire's Kiss. Vampire's Kiss is a 2 mana sorcery. Target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, and you create 2 blood tokens. So it's going to give you a lot of tokens then to enable future madness cards, pitch lands, pitch maybe a Scrapwork Mutt that you don't want, that you need to unearth a hasty one back. And so it's just the perfect card to really glue together this deck to be able to just draw through and find more of your 3 damage spells. And again, this is going to work out very much like a burn deck, because it's a lot of damage that goes straight to the face. You're going to be gaining some residual life from the Vampire's Kiss and the Alms of the Vein, which will put you ahead of a lot of races with some of these more aggressive base decks. And that way that you can oftentimes finish out your opponent going tit for tat. Before you die, you can actually kill them. So we also have a category that utilizes those blood tokens. The first one being is Shrapnel Blast. Shrapnel Blast is a very powerful card that is legal in Pioneer. It's 2 mana and has additional cost to cast Shrapnel Blast. You have to sacrifice an artifact. So what better than like a blood token or an unearthed Scrapwork Mutt, because you do have the opportunity after Scrapwork Mutt deals combat damage and before the end of the turn to simply just Shrapnel Blast it at your opponent's face. So it's a card that's hopefully got you a lot of value off of madness. It's got its unearthed value back in, and then last but not least, you can shrapnel, you can explode the flaming dog at your opponent for 5 more damage. Another one being the Deadly Dispute. Same thing. It works very great with the blood tokens. It also works very great with vampires that may not be able to, like the Epicure, that may not be able to attack in for anything now. You can chump block Deadly Dispute, get some value out of the Epicures. We're going to be running 2 Deadly Disputes. I'm not sure if this wants to be 4, if the Neonate wants to be in here, but Deadly Dispute's a card that I'm going to be tinkering around with. And last but not least is another card that wants artifacts, which is the Unlicensed Disintegration. This is a 3 mana instant which destroys a creature, so it answers basically any threat in Pioneer, and it also does 3 damage to your opponent if you control an artifact. And that's where the blood tokens really come into play, because we are going to be loading up on the blood tokens, having plenty of artifacts for the Unlicensed Disintegration, and allowing us to also deal the damage and control a threat. So this deck acts like a tempo deck in some ways, with a very aggressive 2/1 into a 3/2. You can get that sort of streamlined 1/2 punch, and then really follow it up with controlling the board with things like Fiery Tempers and Shrapnel Blast, and getting there for the creature damage, and still getting value off of the Unlicensed Disintegration. So this deck is very versatile of where its damage can be, whether it needs to be removal or it needs to go to the face. It's got plenty of options. Typically, you do want to play it out like a burn deck, where everything just goes straight to the face, but that option is still there with that, like I said, the streamline 2/1 into a 3/2. A lot of times that's all you need to do, and then remove what your opponent's doing to get in there for the lethal damage. So the mana base is inexpensive as well. If you want to shave off even more from this deck, you can shave off $12 from our most expensive card in the deck, which is the Dragonskull Summit. Dragonskull Summit works very well in this deck because we are going to be running a lot of swamps and mountains, and it will come into play untapped if you control a swamp or mountain. The next up is going to be another similar card, which is the Foreboding Ruins, which enters the battlefield. You have to reveal a swamp or a mountain. Otherwise, it comes into play tapped, and it adds a black or a red, and the other dual land being the Smoldering Marsh, which is a swamp mountain and comes into play untapped if you control two or more basic lands. So the rest of the lands that we're running in here is going to be 7 mountains and 3 swamps, and that makes a total of 22 lands, which is perfect for a mana base and a curve so low. And it's going to be very aggressive. You're going to be able to pitch away excess lands that you draw later on in the game, and everything just works very synergistically in this deck. The next up is going to be our sideboard. So the sideboard, our first thought, is going to be one of the best cards that I already mentioned in this deck is a Lightning Axe. Lightning Axe is been paired with Fiery Temper, and I mean there's a lot of synergy with Lightning Axe in here, whether you have to just pitch a Mutt that isn't doing anything and you can rely on the Unearth to come back. 5 damage to any creature is going to be taking care of a lot of the problematic cards in the format like Shieldred. The next up is going to be the Ashnod's Harvester. Ashnod's Harvester is another Unearth card that also can eat away in the graveyard. There might be some non-budget cards like the Graveyard Trespasser that might be better in this slot, but this is actually a pretty decent card. It's aggressive as well. It's a 2 mana for a 3/1, and it also has Unearth, and then when it attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. So it is something that can eat the graveyard for those graveyard reanimation strategies or strategies that do use the graveyard. And I mean, getting 6 damage out of a card reliably is pretty good. That's exactly what like a burn deck wants, and the Ashnod Harvester does that quite well. I thought about putting these in the main instead of the Neonate, but I decided I want another 1-drop to be aggressive here. And it should we'll have to keep tinkering off with the gameplay of which one actually deserves the spot in the main, whether Neonate just beats cut or whatnot. But it's another budget, very, very inexpensive card, uncommon out of Brothers War, that is a great sideboard option. Next up is the Sanguine Statuette. This is another thing that we can utilize the blood tokens. This really comes into play if your opponent runs a lot of board wipes or sorcery speed removal, that type of stuff. The Sanguine Statuette is a 2 mana which creates a blood token when it's in play, and whenever a blood token is sacrificed, you can actually turn it into a 3/3 with haste. And so that is a card that can actually get in for some hasty damage, and it survives the board wipes and is a very aggressive card. It can be later on used to be flung with a Shrapnel Blast. It's got a lot of synergies in here. Next up, we have 2 more Unlicensed Disintegration, because when they're good, they're really good, and so that's why they're in the sideboard. Between that and the Lava Axe, you're going to be able to control the board. You're going to be able to basically kill anything in the format of Pioneer. And last but not least, we do have some slots dedicated to ripping out cards that are going to be problematic. There are things like Go Blank, which is 3 mana. Target player discards 2 cards and you exile their graveyard. So this can come in mainly versus graveyard decks. And then 3 Duresses, just if there needs to be something against some sort of wombo combo deck or control deck where you need to first turn Duress something out. That's going to be your go-to card. So anyway, there are a lot of upgrades to this deck if you want to be spending more money on this particular deck. Fable of the Mirror Breaker comes to mind. Collective Brutality has a lot of synergy with Madness as well. Both of those are a little bit above our budget for what we have this deck. You can even justify other cards that discard cards like Hazaret. There are many cards that could definitely be justified in here. The Glinthorn Minotaur is another good card that I think, or Buccaneer is another great option for this deck. And you could even go more on the artifact-based strategy out of Brothers or Kamigawa. I believe there's a card that allows you to the Anvil that allows you to sacrifice an artifact to do damage as well as gain a life and leave back I believe it's a servo. Those type of cards could easily go in this deck, and that's what I've been noticing about the Pioneer pool. The Pioneer pool is getting very, very large, and it has a lot of options to try to tinker and tune with. And a deck like this, I think, will just need to find the right amount of tuning against the meta to be able to really see its full potential. But I am still a big believer in both the Unearth mechanic and in the Madness. And for a budget-type brew, this actually plays out a lot like Pauper Burn. A lot of iterations of these Pauper Burn decks, or the red-black burn decks that you see in Pauper. And you'd be surprised at how well it does against a lot of these other aggressive-based decks in the Pioneer format, because it can stay above the life total utilizing the life drain type effects, and the aggressive vampires are actually quite good. None of them are worth using a removal spell on, so if your opponent keeps in removal, then you're eventually going to have a better card advantage by being able to pitch lands later on. That is one last thing that this deck could easily use is some of the man lands. Those are above budget too, like the Den that spits out the goblins, or the Hive that allows you to exile your opponent's graveyard and also leaves back a 3/3. Those are also good cards that could go in this deck. You could utilize other cards too, like the Deserts that could be removal, or there is the Desert that does 2 damage to the face. Both those are also the Shrapnel Ruins. Those are good options in this particular deck. So I'll probably be looking to play some of these as gameplay, but for now we're just going to stick to more of the edited videos and showcasing the deck techs. Hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave that like, subscribe, that would be very helpful, or a comment in the comment section below. You can also give us ideas for decks in the future that you'd like to see, whether it be Modern, Standard, Pioneer. If you have a challenge for me, I'm always up for a challenge for trying to brew around a specific card. And go ahead and check out our Patreon at patreon.com/roguedeckbuilder to keep up to date. You have access to our Discord. We can talk theory crafting about brews and whatnot, as well as get access to the entire Discord, which often has drops and has pricing that is very competitive with Magic the Gathering product.